Supercharging healthcare, AI data. Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to the round table on the topic Supercharging Healthcare, AI, Data and Infrastructure. My name is Petra Ritter. I am the Director for International Affairs at the Charité University Medicine, Berlin, Germany, and I'm a professor for brain simulation at the Berlin Institute of Health. And I'm also leading the European Testing and Experimentation Facility for Health, AI and Robotics. And AI, of course, comes with significant promises in terms of the improvement of healthcare and public health. And also very promising developments can be seen on the European scale, for example, where we have now the AI gigafactories, huge supercomputing centers dedicated to AI. And we also see the development of the testing and experimentation facilities for AI also on the European scale. And of course, in Germany, at the national scale, we have, for example, our high-tech agenda. So there are many very promising developments, but there remains one persistent challenge or problem, and this is the access and the use of health data. And this roundtable is dedicated to exactly this topic, and we have here experts from the field of health research, innovators, policymakers, and together we will discuss today how can we together overcome this challenge of accessing and using health data for AI innovation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists. First, welcome to Dr. Philipp Gerbert. Philipp Gerbert is CEO at the Technical University Munich Venture Labs. He is a senior partner emeritus at the Boston Consulting Group, BCG. He received his PhD in physics at the MIT in the US. He was a postdoc at UCLA in California, and he has a lot of expertise in the Silicon Valley. Next, it's a pleasure to welcome Professor Dr. Carsten Marr. Carsten Marr is founding director at the Institute of AI for Health at Helmholtz Munich. After studying theoretical physics, he transitioned to theoretical biology. He founded his research group at Helmholtz Munich in 2013, and he was among the first to apply deep learning to medical data, and he received several awards, including an ERC Consolidator grant. Next, we have Ms. Dipali Sood. It's a pleasure to welcome you here on stage. Dipali Sood is the global coordinator of the United Nations Population Fund's Women's X Collective. She was born in India. Dipali studied in Hamburg and received her master's degree in Hamburg. And previously, she had leadership roles at the UNICEF and several other organizations. And last but not least, it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Dr. Peter Robinson. He's professor of computational biology at the Jackson Laboratory in the US, and he holds an Alexander von Humboldt professorship for artificial intelligence at the BIH and the Charité in Berlin. He studied mathematics and computer science at Columbia University and also studied medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. And in 2000, he completed his specialist training in pediatrics at the Charité. So warm welcome to our panelists, and thank you for being here for our exchange. And now we start the round table with a question that goes to all panelists. When you think of the topic of this round table, namely stating or implying that AI data and infrastructure can improve the healthcare system, supercharge the healthcare system, what is your personal take of this promise? And we start with Depalisut. Please let us know, what do you think? And please, everyone, only answer in about 1 minute. We really want to be short here.
I will try. Hello, everyone. So for me, Petra, supercharging health means really equitable healthcare for women and girls all around the world. Now you might say, why am I saying that? I'm saying this because just consider a few data points here. Every single day, 700 women and girls die while giving birth. So while bringing life to this world, they are actually losing their own lives. Cervical cancer and breast cancer are the 2 leading causes of death for women around the world, specifically in the developing part of the world. So, at the same time, we would sit here in Berlin in this really nice venue, and we would talk about all the wins that we have made in sciences, in research. However, these are not reaching the women and girls all around the world. So therefore, equitable healthcare is absolutely key. Since you give me only one minute, let me just finish off by saying, it's not just about a moral imperative. It's not just about, this is equity, which it is. However, it also makes economic sense. So earlier this year in the World Economic Forum, I don't know if some of you were there, McKinsey Institute presented a report on women's health, and they talked about a $1 trillion of GDP that can be unlocked in the global economy by 2040 if we were to invest in women and girls' health today, as an international community. So I hope I make my point, and for me, a supercharged healthcare would mean that it puts women and girls at its very heart, at its center. Thank you very much.
Very clear. Yes. So next, Peter, what is your take?
So, I've practiced as a physician in the United States and in Germany for quite some time, and I would say the administrative burdens of a doctor are like rental prices in Berlin. They're going up way faster than inflation. And I think progress in medicine by AI, there's hundreds and hundreds of programs, there's hype that is partially justified, but the thing that AI will change the quickest is it will give your doctor more time for you, because right now you've seen your doctor does the examination and then types with one finger, and AI can do a marvelous job with this. There are already problems with this, so your doctor will have twice as much time for you, not just for you, but for everybody. I think that's going to be an enormous shift that will be one of the first things that comes from the AI revolution.
Thank you very much, Peter. What is your take, Carsten?
So I met my daughter this morning for breakfast, and she said she's scared by AI, and I guess this is a sentiment that many people share. And I think that clinical applications in healthcare is a perfect application for AI, because it is highly regulated. Right? We are pretty sure that we don't do any harm there, because we just go through the regulations that we have to do for any drug, for any medical device. And this is often seen as a disadvantage, I guess, that we have to go through these regulations, but I guess we should turn this around. Imagine in 5 years, every one of us has all his or her health data digitized. We're going to use tools that analyze the data and predict our risk for disease, or interpret medical letters. I would strongly assume that people go for an app that comes from a space like the European Union, where we have strong regulation, where data is secure, and there's a trustworthy party behind that. So I guess we should try to turn that around and use it to our advantage.
Thank you very much, Carsten. Very clear message. Philip, what is your take?
Yeah, I guess I'm the odd man out. I'm actually a physicist. At least my wife is a professor for molecular biology. And I run the venture lab, so I'm totally focused on how can startups in digital health, medtech, and biotech succeed globally, right? Of course, there are many challenges here. So I would name the databases, lack of databases, regulatory environment, fragmentation of everything, I would say, in Europe, wherever you go. And I actually also think there's a certain lack of urgency, particularly because we also see the fast developments in AI. So for me, the core criteria for solutions is they have to be fast, they have to be cheap, and they have to be scalable. In terms of solution spaces, just say the spaces, because then we can get into detail. I think for databases, I think, yes, but we should build on everything there is already in Finland, in UK, and Sweden, and just build on top. And the other part is I'm really interested in databases that have clinical, or we are interested in clinical and statistical data, but also molecular data at the same time. Only then can we make real progress, we think. The other thing, we strongly believe in synthetic data and digital twin. And I think because that will get us, we have to work with the constraints we have because we don't have time to change all the constraints. So let's work with the constraints and then focus on the reality gap. And the last is, how can we get AI to really shorten all the clinical processes, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you very much. Also very clear. So now we want to take the opportunity to look a little bit closer to the challenges that we see to reach these wonderful goals, but also what have we achieved already? What is already available? And we start with you, Peter Robinson. You are leading the human phenotype ontology, and ontologies are very important to foster interoperability, to make sure that AI really can work with different data sources. So what is your understanding of the contribution of vocabularies, ontologies to the challenge of accessing health data globally?
Well, just to put it in perspective, I think ontologies have two main roles. One is interoperability, the other is to make data computable. And imagine you're trying to teach a computer to play chess. It really matters what data you give it to train. Imagine you have a video camera and you're watching players at a tournament, and you're trying to teach your AI from their movements. You would probably get some signal from that, but it wouldn't be as good as coding the data, queen at A4 to B5 or something. And that's where we are with a lot of medical data. The data that's available in EHRs is noisy, sparse. It's in some countries, you have to actually make a diagnosis of osteoarthritis of the knee to be allowed to get a knee X-ray. And so AI is being used to say, well, does this person really have osteoarthritis given that they have the diagnosis? And so I think ontologies and just in general a better way of extracting data from the medical encounter, storing this and presenting it to algorithms will be just as important as more sophisticated machine learning.
Thank you very much. And my next question would go to Carsten. So we have heard already that there are regulatory, legal challenges to build the infrastructure. What, in your opinion, would be the minimum requirements for an infrastructure, not just for storage, but also for processing, and maybe also with high-performance computing and supercomputing, processing at a large-scale health data?
I guess the most important requirement is that it is conform with the AI Act and GDPR, right? So to give an example, we just published a paper where we can write a report out of a histological section. So out of a microscopic image that's typically assessed by a pathologist, and then a report is written down or recorded. We now do this automatically. We save time. We make the pathologist's life easier. Now, that was just trained on a data set with 6,000 image text pairs from the dermatology in Munich. We would like to train that on more data and more diverse data, so partners from Europe, ideally, and also going beyond dermatology, right, other diseases. In order to do that, you either accumulate data at a safe space, so we have to be GDPR compliant, we have to have GPUs to train the model at a place to come up with that kind of model, or you would have alternatively some federated infrastructure which allows you to send the model around and train at the places without getting the data out. And I mean, these are these two aspects, I guess, of training large models. And then when it comes to applying the models, I guess what we also need is the infrastructure to redo that at the clinics, right? So once the model is trained, we want to apply it in the clinics. So also there we need infrastructure to run the models and implement it in workflows.
Yeah. So we basically need a network, not just the tubes or the storage for the health data, but also the processing environments that are compliant in order to process sensitive data like health data. So we have now heard that it's really relevant to have this infrastructure for accessing health data compliantly, protecting also the rights of the patients, the individuals behind the data. And this makes a big difference. It really makes an impact having such an infrastructure. And at the moment, there's a lack, there's a gap for such infrastructure, or not having such an infrastructure. Maybe, Dipali, you could tell us a little bit more about what implications has the availability or non-availability of secure infrastructure for health data and processing infrastructure for health data for unbiased AI. Yeah, according to the AI Act, we need to look into the trustworthiness and also fairness of AI. What is the relevance of the availability of infrastructure for fair AI solutions?
Thank you so much for that question, Petra, because I think it's really important. And give me a couple of minutes to put my point here, because I think you got to the point of it all. So, for me, the starting point is not about, well, we can add on equity later on. The starting point has to be that equity has to be part and parcel of the very development of the AI technology. I mean, Carsten just said, and the other colleagues here are talking about how important AI has become today, and it's going to become even more, and it's going to transform our lives. However, when AI reflects the existing biases that we have in our society, right? It can really reinforce discrimination. And discrimination against women and girls that already exist, and some of them can actually convert into life-threatening situations for women and girls, yeah? I'm going to say very quickly 3 areas that I think are absolutely key, and these are, let's start with representation. Representation, participation, and governance. What do I mean by that? Well, so let me look at a few data items here. Right now, 70% of all AI health-related data is actually coming from the high-income countries, yeah? 30% of this is about segregated data, meaning women and men separately. So I think you already said AI can be as good or as fair and as just as the data is being fed from what it's learning, right? The data that it receives. So in this case, with the 70% coming from a part of the world, 30% only disaggregated, I think it would not be wrong to say, or maybe it's a bit provocative, but the algorithms are actually spitting out, and they're learning from male data set in order to make decisions about female health. So you can imagine where that goes. So, and studies have shown that this is potential of misdiagnosis, delayed diagnosis, because some of these things are absolutely passing the suboptimal treatments, and some studies are showing up to 80% of errors. So then, what do we do then? So we need to mitigate this gender bias that exists, right? And therefore, it's absolutely important that the AI systems have data which is diverse, and Carsten, you said that already. It's diverse, it's coming from different parts of the world. It has both men and women also coming from different parts of the world and not just one. Second is participation. And what do I mean here? Participation, right now, about 25% of AI specialists globally, even here in Germany, are women, okay? So, well, it's not, I think it's fair to say that women are very underrepresented when it comes to AI technology, and especially in the leadership roles. And there is a double whammy when you go to the developing countries, because even in accessing digital technology, even, forget even about AI, just to be online, there are 37% women are online today compared to 51% men in, let's say, low and middle income countries. So, what do we do to make sure that this gender divide is then met, right? We need women there. Finally, on governance, so less than 20% countries have dedicated policies or health policy guidelines that refer specifically to gender and women's health. So 20%, leaving 80% is basically unregulated. And So without these safeguards, what happens is that biases get embedded into the code itself. And so that's why we keep having the same cycle where we are receiving, information which is not correct. So just to sum it up, it's not really about like cleaning the data set, right? It really is about who is in the room that is defining the problem, who's the one who's generating the data, and then who benefits from the results of that data that is being spat out. So when women are visible in data, they're audible in the design, and they are powerful in the decisions that shape technology, I think AI will become, what you said, fair and just and also accurate. So, and efficient, of course, as everybody said.
Thank you very much for this important message. And next, I would like to ask you, Philip, in your role as a CEO of the Venture Labs, you are working with startups, SMEs, companies in general. So from an innovator's point of view, how important is it for, in particular, startups and SMEs, and maybe also how difficult is it for them to access health data for developing and also validating their technologies?
Well, as I said before, obviously Germany is hopeless. Finland, UK, and Sweden are not so bad, I find. But let me just comment perhaps from a startup point of view. We think we're having the wrong discussion in many ways. I give you two examples, hopefully provocative enough. One is 10 years ago, when you had self-driving cars, the German automotive makers got together and said, look, this Uber, they're driving so many miles, they're collecting so many data. We have to get together because we don't have enough data. We have to build big consortia and so on and so forth. Obviously, nothing ever happened. Secondly, it was totally irrelevant. I was just thinking, look, why don't you look at aerospace, right? A few years later, NVIDIA came out with Constellation. What do? You simulate, right? You train on the simulator. And then you have a 10% reality gap. And then with the reality gap, you can say, okay, I trained the last few miles on the real world, and I improve my simulator at the same time, and that's how you make progress. And the same, that's why I say, let's get a synthetic data set that is regulatorily free, and then let's use that, and while you use it, improve it in the real world, feed it into the synthetic data set, you can do something. The second is, we work a lot with the Boston cluster, the San Francisco cluster, the UK cluster, and even China. We don't have a sense of urgency here. And I give you an even more provocative example from defense. We have a company in our thing that has ARC that transports autonomously a drone, but driving on the ground, transports both material and also wounded people. So to say, how do you get them from the field? Before the Korean War, it actually had managed to get a NATO certificate, fulfilled all the requirements, went to the Korean, failed completely. It innovated dramatically, and now it came back to NATO and said, look, I have two things. I have one, fulfills your requirement. The other one is actually battle tested. What do you want, right? And that's why I say you feel the sense of urgency. Apologies for the provocative sound, but I say to startups, look for Ukraine, right? If India feels the pain, then go to India and innovate there and bring it back, right? Because we don't have the time to convince the European Union of all of this if you see what's happening in other parts of the world. I mean, if you're really interested in the impact and solution, we have to be fast. So that's why I say go for a simulation, go for federated data, leverage everything you already have. Don't build it 20 times at the same time. And simplicity, speed, cheap, and scalability is always should be the core criteria for any initiative we take.
Very interesting, and maybe, no, it's perfect. Maybe we can directly follow up on what you just have outlined. So what we see here in Europe, and also from the perspective of the testing experimentation facility that I'm leading, there are many startups and companies with AI systems, but they rarely reach a really high TRL level and go through the actually regulatory compliance obligations process and get the certification, for example, in the case of medical devices. So how would you suggest in Germany and Europe, as not moving elsewhere, to close that gap between the great AI innovations in terms of research and the access to the market of these innovations? So obviously they never reach the market. And how could we change it here in Germany and Europe?
Okay, perhaps a few things. Them never reaching the market in Europe has several reasons. One of them is funding, which is quite critical and so on. But I'll give you perhaps two answers. First of all, because you asked before, currently, in none of our startups, compute is a big constraint. Compute is a lot of constraints in lots of other things, but here even we have people from the Baker Lab, and they say, frankly, with a 100K cluster, you're in business if you have access to things and so on. So data is a critical constraint, compute is not. Now for this, we now have a huge discussion. We have entrepreneurship labs that we've built with Novo Nordisk and so on and so forth to say, how do we build clinical paths? And we think they're no longer accurate. Our hypothesis is a startup today that thinks it will go to 10 years of clinical trial is doomed because it will just not happen. So we're trying very hard to say, how can you leverage AI for accelerating this clinical trial? What could it be? If you had a pandemic, everyone would be using it, right? We don't have a pandemic right now, so people are slow, but how can we leverage in the individual steps, obviously to accelerate your company build, but to also currently to accelerate the steps that are required and in parallel build in some geography of the world, doesn't have to be Europe first, what kind of first phase or second phase might already be accepted on clinical trials, etc. At the same time, there's a huge effort looked in the Helmholtz or so, build a virtual cell, and what can you do on the virtual cell? All comes back to the same idea, right?
It's interesting that you say that compute power is not the need. If you ask the SMEs, what is actually the need? Often I hear in the healthcare sector, access to health data. This is really an enormous need. And maybe Peter Robinson can comment a little bit, since he's dealing with genetic data that contain a lot of personal information. What is needed in order to provide to the researchers, the academic researchers, but also the companies, industry, access to such sensitive health data?
Well, that's a very complicated question for 1 minute. I would say that we actually do have enough access to data like that. Just not everybody has access from all places, but there are, for instance, you can get access to the data at all of us, 1 million genomes, etc. So I don't actually disagree that data access is a problem for purely genetic data. The problem is actually getting high quality clinical data to basically associate genetic variants with clinical outcomes. That's the big problem that nobody's really solved yet.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about the bias that is generated. You have already touched upon it, Dipali. But from your perspective, what is needed on the one hand to remove the bias in the future, but then to also make sure that these technologies, if they capture the diversity from all regions in the world, are also accessible to these regions that are economically maybe less developed than other regions?
Sure. I think I talked about inclusion, I talked about equity. I think now time has come to talk about investments, and I think you started mentioning that already. What is absolutely crucial is that investments are in place for us to not only test certain devices, products, innovations, startups, but also to scale them. And to reach those, the 80% of the world's population lives in the developing part of the world, right? So to reach those populations. So for me, I'm going to talk about de-risking investments, and this is also coming, from where I'm coming from, UNFPA, Women X Collective, which is the program that I had here in Berlin. AI and women's health can be scaled if you get the right investments and you de-risk them before you attract private and public capital. What do I mean by that? So what we are doing right now is that using catalytic grants or catalytic funding, we are testing, so to speak, advanced solutions or advanced innovations. For example, one I can mention right here, which also has the potential of being powered by AI, are these ultrasounds, so handheld ultrasound machines. So these are literally, these devices are like this size. And they are basically, you can bring them to point of care. So, bringing them to the communities, teaching the midwives or, low-tech, let's say, personnel that are able to, within 3 or 4 weeks, by certain training, are able to learn how to use those ultrasound devices on pregnant women, for example, to, look for anomalies. Once they are AI-powered, that is when, magic happens, because you can really scale it up very quickly, in very many parts of the world. And then the problem remains to be solved is, of course, investments. So what we are trying to do right now in Zambia, Kenya, and other countries is to make a case for support. And we would love to share that with the public. So it'll be public good, no matter what evidence we generate, right, successful or any errors. And then crowd in both the private sector. So here I mean the pharma companies, some of them manufacturing those devices, healthcare providers, health insurance companies, as well as the public sector. So, the governments of these countries I'm mentioning, but also multilateral development banks, financial institutions, to come and actually crowd in the financing required to scale up these devices, and so that it can reach as many women and girls as it can.
Very interesting. So the Berlin Institute of Health, the organization I am working for, is developing with many partners, Helmholtz Munich, for example, supercomputing for health data. And the goal is to really enable many different sites to work together on different data sets coming from different data sources that are interoperable, and having also the compute power, not just for academic research, but also for innovators in order to run the deep learning, for example, algorithms that you are using for your kind of biomedical research. The initiative that has been started by the Berlin Institute of Health under the leadership of Christopher Baum is called Medicore, and that's very exciting. It's a collaboration between private and public players, and is considered highly relevant. But what are the success factors that would guarantee that such an initiative, that of course costs a lot of money, but in my opinion is very important, really has the impact that it should have? Maybe, Carsten, you can say a few words on that.
In order to train these models, we need the data from clinics and health providers and labs, right? So we have to get access to that. And for that, I guess we need homogeneous framework of regulation that is stable, right, and is interpreted in the same way across the EU, Germany, and all the stakeholders in there.
Thank you very much. This was concise and actually a perfect timing for starting our question and answer session. We now have 10 minutes for questions from the audience, and we are very happy to respond to these questions. Please also let us know whom you are asking, and then we can directly direct the question to the panelist. Please.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the informative session. But I do have a question for all of you, and I have a specific question for you as well. So the true bottleneck of healthcare AI isn't the models, it's the interoperability and the real world deployment. So if you had the authority to kind of restructure AI in healthcare from the ground up, what was the one structural change that would, mostly accelerate safe clinical adoption of AI globally, and what is stopping you from doing it? And my second question is for Ms. Dipali, is women are underrepresented in research, and I recently presented my lab pitch day before yesterday on breaking the wall of hidden heart damage in women. And so I need to know what steps that we can take, and as you said, you're in United Nations. What is stopping United Nations, because they have funding? Why can't we just make something? Why are we depending on startups to kind of have innovative solutions when we can directly implement and have, help the women? Because mostly it's from high income societies, but actually the problem is faced from low income people. So what can we do to empower women to find, get data from them and help them actually? So this is my question.
Thank you for the two questions. Maybe we start directly with the second one, and Depali, and then go to the first one.
Sure. Honestly, right now, I think everybody knows UN is a little bit under fire. If you're reading newspapers, you know that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a lot of innovation going on in the community level themselves. So here, I don't mean, devices or technology, but I mean just in the way, communities come together, a lot of times led by women or elderly within those communities, and they find innovative solutions for problems that they're facing because nobody's coming to help them. So why don't we just go and fund and finance them? That's exactly what we are trying to do with WomenX. Our idea is really to first attract some kind of grants or funding, and then use that model by what we call assess, adapt, and scale in order to attract really capital markets financing. Because if it's only grant dependent, you will have project after project, pilot after pilot. So you really need to have large sums of money. And that could come, of course, also from the governments of those countries, but many of the countries are themselves under big debts, right? They are sitting with sovereign debts. For example, countries have, 60 to 70% GDP is just being used to return their sovereign debts or parts of them, or to service them, or their interest rates. So what we need to do is to make it a win-win for every stakeholder. And therefore, getting in the private sector is really, really key. And also, working with the financial institutions, because they have the capital, they need to deploy it. They are looking for those solutions that can actually work and can also generate some let's put it like this, some profits, right, for those private sector companies that are trying to enter those markets that they haven't been there yet, because those are difficult markets to enter. So, please reach out to me later on as well. And I'm not the only one doing innovation or accelerator. There are many other agencies within the UN, outside as well. Here we're sitting in Berlin. This is a real hub, a startup hub of femtech. There are amazing inventions happening right here. And the point really is that it's so fragmented. And so how do we use the ecosystem here in Berlin, in Germany, in the European Union, to also make a move towards those countries which are not still reaching the same benefits or same.
Thank you so much, Depali, for the response. The second question was about how would you design from the scratch, if you could, an AI landscape in Europe? And Carsten, what is your thought on this?
Thanks for the question. I agree with you that we have this immense discrepancy between so many papers that show that things work out right, and then so few applications that really run in the clinics. And to that point, what should we do to make that change? I guess we can do that now. And there are a couple of examples where clinics did it, right? In Germany, for example, Essen is doing a great job, and Toronto in Canada. So what we need is a team of dedicated people who scan solutions, identify those which are most efficacious and most safe, put them in the clinics, run a pilot, and then just deploy them, right? Just this, we need investment there, we need the courage to do it, but I guess what we can gain from that, right, is cases, Philip, that work out and then can also attract capital outside and really can spun off into products.
May I answer in a slight different way? I think you're asking the wrong question, because
there are no wrong questions.
No, okay. Apologies. I didn't say a bad question, but the wrong question. Your question was, how would you design it from scratch if I were to? The trouble is we can't redesign it from scratch. And I'm saying that because, the very famous, I was 30 years management consultant. The famous book, Innovator's Dilemma, and the basic things is incumbents fail because of change management. If you take an approach that requires lots of change management and getting to a completely different would defy that is a recipe for failure. So I think the more productive question is, okay, what could we do within the current system to produce? And I'm totally convinced you have to produce, have to get some pockets that work. And for example, Zurich is working very hard. They built something, AI solution in healthcare and so on, and said, can't we convince Munich, the Rechtse to say, have patients opt in? Right? So yeah, there's this whole thing, have patients opt in, I want to do it, right? If you can show somewhere that it works better, then you have to create a dynamics for good solutions to scale within all the constraints we have today, because otherwise you drown in change management. Apologies for the
The good
wrong
news is we have now, since January, the European Health Data Space in Europe in force. Yeah, it is not applicable, it will be implemented, but this means we don't need the opt-in anymore. There's only opt-out for the patients, and all clinical routine data in the future will be accessible via the national health data access bodies and other infrastructures for secondary research and development. And Peter has to say something.
I want to say, I think, sorry, but the premise of your question is questionable. I think our societies have been able to implement change. We just have to look at what has changed in the last 20 years for genetics, and we're using completely different technologies. All sorts of softwares have made their way into the clinical field. So I think our systems are able to change. Another thing I'd like to say is if you actually look at clinical machine learning papers, and there have been many reviews, a lot of the papers are actually pretty bad. They don't understand even the basics of how to train a machine learning model. So they're rarely tested for generalizability. So I would say, 90% of the stuff out there is a great paper, but it's not something that's anywhere close to being a product. But I think we are, there's already so many applications in AI that are part of, a lot of things in imaging, for instance, that are part of the clinical thing. So I think we are making progress.
I think it's actually a very interesting point you made, Peter, about reproducibility, transparency of AI models. And this is also part of the AI Act that came in force in August last year and becomes now step-by-step applicable, which actually requires transparency and documentation, reproducibility also of the AI models in Europe. But we have time for another question. I hope we could address yours sufficiently. There are a couple of hands. Let's continue here.
So thank you. My name is Gaëlle Patricia. I'm a final year PhD in computer science, working on AI for emergency and ambulance. And the first challenge in the beginning of my PhD was the accessibility of data, because it's the data, there is confidentiality, there is protection of data. So my question for you today is my question is about what is the situation here in Germany, because my PhD, I'm doing it in Canada. What is the situation about data accessibility, especially data with confidentiality, with personal data, because I'm using historical data of emergency calls for forecasting and triage application. So what is the situation here, and what mechanism or partnership could help to have access to the data for build a very nice
Thank you for this important question. Does anyone want to answer this?
I can give a...
Yes, please.
So, thanks for the question. I guess wherever you look, right, we have this problem that there is just data about patients which is hard to aggregate, right, hard to get out of the clinics. And that is the same for Canada, for Germany, for US, even for China. And I guess there are some ways to get out of that. And I guess the simulation of data that we can use for training is one of the steps we should do more and invest, right? Because we can generate data that has similar statistical properties than the real one that we then, flag or make sensitive data incomprehensible and then be able to share that. So I guess this is something that we have to do, because we will never get access to all data just for very good reasons.
Yeah, well, thank you for the answer. I personally have another opinion. I do not believe, even though I do brain simulation and the replacement of real health data by synthetic data completely. I think we are far away from this, and it's great if we do research, but at the moment, synthetic data do not have this detail and this personal, if they would reflect the personal traits, then they would reflect individual features of people, and maybe we would have to protect them then as well, because one human is unique with all the individual parts. So therefore, I would opt for infrastructure that provides a compliant environment where all the sensitive data that exists can be reused, in compliance with the law. And there are three needs: interoperability, we have discussed them all, also legal interoperability, since you are from Canada. It's very interesting, you have heard probably about the adequacy decision for the GDPR. It's actually only applicable to companies in Canada, but not to the academic sector. And we need to have also legal interoperability, and of course semantic interoperability and infrastructure interoperability. And collaborating and working on this is ongoing, and we have to continue this path, in my view. Yeah? Thanks for the great question. There was another hand, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Omnea Atalla, Professor of Biomedical Signal Processing and AI in Medicine and Healthcare. I'm actually coming from the other side of the world, from Egypt, which is a developing country. I'm actually working in the field of AI in healthcare, and we're trying to use the models available, but we're facing some challenges, like we're facing bias, of course, and we're trying to retrain large language models available. But actually, we are facing difficulties in not all of them are accessible in the Middle East, for example, and even the ones that are accessible are very expensive for us to use them. We're trying to train the large language model with our own data. As you said, they are biased with data from Europe, China, and America, and US, which are not considering our culture, beliefs, and values. So we are collecting data for mental health support, and we're collaborating with psychiatrists and to collect our data, but we're not able to have enough fund to use the models, which are very expensive for us to use. Are there efforts from your side to be able to use these models in the developing countries, and what we can do to be able to use models which are not accessible? Thank you.
Who wants to answer? Would you like to address
I can
this?
start, and then maybe you can. I think you're right. Affordability is a very big part of everything that we are doing right now, because there are quite some technology out there when it comes to women's health. However, translating it from, let's say, from Germany to Egypt or another part of the world, the pricing issue is very, very important. So when I was talking about the small devices, the ultrasound devices I was talking about, so obviously they're from $4,000 or $5,000 compared to these big machines that we have in the 100,000 euros sitting in the big hospitals. So that is the innovation, to actually create smaller machines that are smaller devices that are able to help as much, maybe not as good as a mammography or as good as but still to a certain extent that they are able to. And what we are trying to do right now with that example is that could the current POCUS, the point-of-care ultrasound devices, could that be repurposed or multi-purpose to also look for breast cancer, for example, with another probe and with other kinds of training? It's much more complicated, rather than having women to wait to go to the big hospitals or the towns to do the mammographies or the ultrasound. So the idea, it really is innovation. How are you going to bring these products to as close as possible to the last mile? That's what we are trying to do. And affordability is definitely a problem, and that's why we work also with the private sector, with the pharma industry, trying to create a win-win whereby they can work in different markets that they are typically not their markets, but to opening up access to different kinds of audiences at the same time, negotiating what we call affordable prices. And UNFPA, as other UN agencies, we are able to do what we call we're able to negotiate by volume guarantees. We're able to negotiate certain pricing for the South, for the global South. Other agencies do the same for different kinds of products, because they're actually making big orders so that the pharma industry is able to produce it at a rate which is more fair and just for the rest of the world. But we should also talk, because I'm very excited to hear your work in Egypt, and as you said, the AI has to have the data which is ethical and credible and equitable for those people that it's trying to serve.
May I just, sorry, my wife's Egyptian, I ought myself, so I really feel your pain, but I would be very optimistic. I mean, just take the public market, right? OpenAI, for the same performance, came down 98% in costs in 2 years. DeepSeek was even better and was open source. On the price digression of the core, so to say, compute power and model, I would be very, very optimistic. doesn't solve the database and you know some specialized model, but I think the history is on your side, right?
And maybe I can add to that, Peter. I mean, I guess it's a great suggestion, right? Yeah. To say once we have such an infrastructure set up in Europe, to provide compute also to low and middle income countries to train their models on that infrastructure as well.
Maybe it's another thing I have to mention, that the infrastructure still in Egypt is not well built to be used in all hospitals. Maybe private hospitals are well structured, but the public hospitals, which are not well built to accept technology and to use these technologies in them. So this is another challenge we're facing. We're trying, of course, digital transformation has recently been applied in Egypt, and we are working hard. And by the way, I have a project that also trying to build a tool that uses AI for breast cancer. To be more affordable for patients in rural and low resources areas, which depends on AI and also imaging techniques. We're trying to do though, but still we're facing lack of funds, lack of technology. So we are in a battle.
Thank you for this fantastic exchange, which is very important. We see the lights are turning on again. This means we are approaching the end of the session. And I would like to take the opportunity at the end, before closing, to ask each of the panelists one final question. Please answer in one word or three, but really very shortly. So the question is, what is the next step or key topic we shall address to break down the wall, according to the title of this conference, to empower AI in healthcare? And we start with you, Philip, please.
As I said, simulation and, so to say, cheap, fast data lakes.
Okay, this was not 3 words, but almost. Thank you. Carsten?
I think we sense the urgency in the health system, right? So I guess what we have to do is take algorithms that work, deploy them in the clinics, figure out what really helps us, and then split it off.
Thank you very much, Carsten. And the next is Dipali, please.
So your question is, what are the next walls we are going to fall?
Exactly.
Well, this divide, right? This divide between North and South, and men and women. So let's just come together. We are one international community.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Peter, please.
I would improve the way we extract data from medical encounters by improving electronic health record systems and other applications in the hospital.
Thank you so much for this wonderful exchange that we had. I hope everyone was enjoying it. So summarizing very quickly, there are still barriers, but we are also developing in the right direction, I would say. There are also achievements that we have to collectively, as an ecosystem between private sector and public sector, collaborate in order to make sure that the great innovations are distributed fairly in the world and go to the market to benefit patients very soon. So thanks so much to the panelists and to the audience for the great discussion.
And thank you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this really great impact dialogue that we are going to tackle now. My name is Dagmar Schuller. I'm a professor of applied AI and also a founder of an AI company. And I'm especially happy to welcome my great guests here who are going to talk about a really big topic, which is AI trust, especially in research and in science. Since AI is an integral part in research and also becomes even more integral in communications, we face a lot of challenges, but also have a lot of potential how we can leverage what we are getting out there. And this is a new age. And I'm really happy that I have 3 awesome panelists here, and you will really enjoy this session because we have deep experts in this field. First, I'd like to welcome Alice Henchley. Alice is Director of Communications, Integrity, Ethics and Editorial Policy at Springer Nature, where she worked for over a decade. Following many years of focus on global communications of research content and related issues, she now specializes in integrity, ethics, editorial and policy matters. She also serves as a trustee of UK's Science Media Centre. Welcome, Alice. Right next to her is David Caswell. David is the founder of Storyflow, an innovation consultancy, and he has worked with AI applied to journalism for more than 10 years. Previously, he was executive product manager of BBC News Labs, and he held senior positions, especially leading AI initiatives at Yahoo, at Tribune Publishing, and the Los Angeles Times. Welcome, David. And also right next to me, we have Volker Stollert. He is a science journalist by passion. And this passion has led him to become the founding chief editor and managing director of the Science Media Center in Germany. Volker has been an innovator in science journalism for a very, very long time, and he received numerous awards. And he is also, for his work, very recognized in print, online, and broadcast media. Thank you very much for joining us, Volker. So, we have had discussions up front, and actually I have to tell you, this is going to be really, really insightful. But my first question is going to be towards Alice. Alice, public trust in science is a prerequisite actually for accepting innovation and also its application. And AI also allows for a lot of changes or challenge or potentials that we have. But transparency has become a really great matter and also a really very impactful topic. So how can journalists and researchers ensure this transparency in their research and communication?
Thank you, and thank you to the Volkswagen Foundation for inviting me today to speak. It's a real privilege to be here. I think the real key to this is actually about ensuring that we have access to the research, we can understand and interrogate AI, and that means that we need to publish it. So going back to the 60s through 80s, we saw some of these technology companies like Bell Lab were publishing research, were doing full research. And then there was a bit of a lull. And then in the sort of 2010s, this came back with DeepMind. And this was actually a real collaboration with Nature of publishing AI research again, and it really came about. You've got Demis Hassabis collaborating with the Nature research editors who had experience in cognitive neuroscience, and that kind of foundation that you see in academia, that use of publishing research as a way to validate it and provide trust, was then applied into AI companies. And since then, we've gone on to publish a huge range of AI research. And that means that it's peer-reviewed, it's really assessed very carefully by a wide range of experts, and then it's available to everyone so you can have more trust in what you're seeing and what those AI companies are doing. And hopefully we will see that even further going into the future.
So you especially also saying just publishing and communicating and talking about this is very important for it. So what type of advice would you say if a young scientist is coming up at the moment and saying, oh, I want to publish?
Okay, well, I think the first thing when you're thinking about young scientists is actually to think about really making sure you're doing your research ethically, right? And you're transparent about your use of AI. But if you're talking about AI researchers coming to us, it's about talking to the editors who can give you real guidance about the things that you might need to consider and where you expand. And then when you bring in the peer reviewers, who are often quite discipline specific, they also provide guidance. And what this does is actually extend the research and make it more trustworthy, more validated, and puts it into a much better place.
So we are really talking about an ecosystem that has been established there and an information ecosystem. And David, in your role and also especially with your experience, how do you see that this ecosystem is changing at the moment and what is the impact of AI on it?
Well, I think the ecosystem is fundamentally, structurally changing. And it's changing in ways that are sometimes hard to even picture. Like an example would be, what does it even mean to publish in an AI-mediated information ecosystem? What is it that you're publishing? Are you publishing articles or papers? Are you publishing individual facts? You know, when you look at sort of the information flows that are already a major part of our new ecosystem, you know, ChatGPT or Google AI overviews, you know, you have a question for them, and they're taking information from a whole range of different information artifacts, you know, videos and papers and news articles and all of it, and they're pulling out the semantic information from those different artifacts and then combining them in ways with context and so on. So, you know, at the moment, yes, you can track back to individual artifacts, but the individual artifacts are probably not the stable end state for how to publish things to an LLM or to an LLM world. You know, it doesn't seem sustainable that that either scientists or journalists, for that matter, will put an awful lot of effort into producing information artifacts that will then be read only by machines or primarily by machines in order to create experiences for others. So that's just one example of the ways that the information ecosystem is going to fundamentally shift, is already fundamentally shifting. And I think there's many others. Like some of them get quite profound. You know, one example is what do you put in an archive? What persists in a world where information kind of flows from one form to another through language models and image models and video models and so on? Is it the raw material that the thing starts from? Is it the intermediate artifacts? Is it the end experience that everybody experiences differently based on their prompts or their requirements? You know, we're even hard as it is to imagine, perhaps entering an ecosystem where we don't really know what the unit of information that persists in an archive is.
That is very, very interesting. So Volker, you at Science Media Center, you do a lot of research and experiments. I think exactly with what David described at the moment. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that when I started the Science Media Center 10 years ago, I was a science journalist by training, and I said, science journalism cannot stay the way it was. So there needed to be much more innovation, and that was before LLMs became public usable. And so we decided to set up a lab with software engineers. So we have 10 people in the editorial department and 10 people basically doing software development to use these new tools, which as they come available, and trying to find uses for science journalism to make basically better science journalism. I'll give you one example, a very simple example, where we were thinking along lines. For a classical problem of journalism, and you can do it now with Google and stuff, you need an expert in a very specific field as a journalist, but you don't have domain-specific expertise in a certain field. And it's very hard, so far, to find the expert who is really fitting your own question you have, but you cannot really spot what the expertise of the experts are. You get lists on Google and stuff. So what we try to do is that you can nowadays with language models and agentic models, you can extract papers published or information about the experts quasi-automatically and then match that with reputational information. And then you get a list of experts specifically addressing the concern you have. So if you have Ebola outbreak stuff, and you want to really find, let's say, in Germany or in Switzerland or in South Africa, wherever you are, and you can now, with these tools, find very specific experts which are, through the language models, are really focusing on your search intent, which is a kind of an application we are working on for journalists. And because that is an issue you often have. You dive in a new topic, you don't know much a lot, then you Google a little bit, you call some guy, but maybe he's not the right way to think. That is one example. Another example is which we are looking at is monitoring science. So as long as we have publications, we still have publications. We are not yet there where you are already aiming at. But how do you find in the overwhelmingly information overload of the many, many papers, 5 million papers published every year, how do you find the specific papers you need to know about? And how can you then really make good stories out of it? And I think that is a problem in itself, where we need better monitoring tools, but not just monitoring tools, because we don't want to know what kind of papers are published, but what are publicly relevant. So what is journalism really in need of? What does the public need to know? And these kind of information, science journalists know a lot about it, but we have to make it kind of explicit into the machine so that this machine can then get papers you in a daily routine that you can see what's new, what's important, and what may be relevant for the public. So these kind of systems you can think of, and I'm a little bit not there where David is, in that well, there's this talk, AI can be a scientist, AI can be a journalist. Maybe it will, maybe this will be the direction of it, but I consider it, at least in our organization, it's a very good tool. Mm-hmm. So we can use it in many, many different ways, but we have to be very creative now and speed up. Otherwise, all the other guys who are around will do it for us. So if you want to be relevant in this new digital ecosystem, I think the professional journalists or professional scientists need really hard thinking about how to do it in a way which is functional equivalent to what we have before. Let's say, I mean, scientific peer review, for example, is very, very important, quality control. And journalism, again, is also kind of a quality control gatekeeper for the public, what's relevant, what's important, what's necessary to know. And if we lose this function, we get a lot of stuff out there which may not be good for the public and maybe not even good for science. So I think this is a really, what is the functional equivalent of this in the age of AI, which is part of the equation? So I think that's, for me, it's an open question so far. So I'm still saying, well, gatekeeping is good for society, and let's see how it plays out.
So thank you very much. I think actually ethical dilemmas just arise imminently when we hear what you're already discussing in that area, and especially using also AI contributions to scientific discoveries, but utilizing it as a tool. Who holds the responsibility actually for things that are not correct, or for hallucinations in those type of publications, or who is actually doing the applied consistency checking in a way that you can even tangle what's going on? That this ethical dilemma, Alice, how do you perceive it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a couple of things to disaggregate. If you're talking really about responsibility for AI-generated content, it's really fundamentally important that the authors always remain accountable for this content, right? And so, a couple of years ago, when this became a really hot topic and we had to develop the editorial policies around this and authorship, there were a few publishers who went out there and were just like, oh, no, you can't use AI in like the production of your manuscripts. No, you can't do that. And our view was, it's out there, it's being used, but actually you have to be transparent about it, you have to be accountable for it. You can't view an LLM as an author. Authorship always lies with you and responsibility always lies with you. And if you apply that when researchers think about authorship, which is such a key element about being a researcher, it then gives you that layer of responsibility on top and about thinking about how you do your research, and I think that's really key.
Yes. Actually, you just mentioned also the publication, the author is always responsible, but sometimes the author might not even be as knowledgeable about the technology that they are using within the tools, which can be a quite critical aspect. And David, you mentioned before the flow of information, the different type of impacts in vision, in audio, in text, and so on. So this content, as you said before when we were talking, it becomes liquid. What do you mean by that, and how do you describe or tackle that one?
Well, the way to think about this concept of liquid content is to picture an article, a news article about some story, and then picture all of the individual pieces of information in that. So some of them are facts, some of them are arguments, some of them are stylistic attributes. There's all of these things, these intangible things that are contained in this artifact, this piece of text, maybe 800 words of text. And we've been in this ecosystem for about 400 years, longer if you take manually written articles, that combines, that inextricably links the artifact with the information that it contains. And we're now entering an ecosystem where those things are separate. And so what that means is that the information can flow from one text document to another. So for example, an article to a summary, or it can flow from multiple text documents to one text document, maybe many articles to a summary of a story, or it can flow from a text to video, or text to an image, maybe a prompt for an image generator or a video generator, or it can flow from a video to a text document. It can move back and forth between mediums on command, basically instantaneously. And we're not quite fully there yet. I think we're pretty close in text. But this idea of the information and the stylistic content and all of these things flowing across mediums, or flowing between artifacts, or flowing from many artifacts to a few artifacts, or a few artifacts to many artifacts, all of this thing is new. And this is what I mean by this sort of emerging AI-mediated information ecosystem. This is not an incremental extension of the information ecosystem that we're all familiar with. This is a radically different information ecosystem.
Volker, what is your view on this liquid content and the transparency requests coming with it?
Yeah, actually, so we are basically, with the Science Media Center, we're sending out expert comments on new discoveries in science, so that the journalists get a kind of a contextualized version of what the paper is about. And so far, artificial intelligence is not as good and say, well, this is really a good new discovery. So you still need domain-specific experts to say, well, this is new, this is relevant, this is important. And we sent out these comments. And 3 years ago, in 2022, when GDP came up, I was for a moment hesitating, should we shut down our website? Because we are basically serving the journalist community. I mean, we have 2,200 journalists getting all our comments. And if I put out the comments after, it's a little bit delayed. So 1 day, 2 days afterwards, it's published on the website. So AI will pick it up and will send it into the universe and put it in pieces. And the experts may say, well, what are you doing? So I was almost saying, well, we should not do it. We did not, so we stayed there. But as I see it now, so these expert comments for a time, it's a kind of already a liquid comment on a debate which may be going on AI and in the public sphere. But if you have an expert comment which is new and is relevant, it will be found by anybody who's looking for it. So that's good. So this guy, there's a bird flu outbreak in Germany or something, and then you get an expert comment which you say, well, it's not a pandemic yet. It has not yet the mutations, because he's a domain-specific expert. And you put it out, then it's basically everywhere. Anybody can now access through ChatGPT, and it will find this comment, which is a good thing, I think, in a way.
But if I want to read that in Ukrainian or in Tagalog in a different language, or if I want to read, if I want to read 5,000 expert comments and get the sort of the balance of opinion, or if I want to get the history of expert comments, how has expert comment on the vaccine changed over time, or wearing of masks, or whatever it happens to be, that is a capability that has been very, very difficult and expensive to provide until these machines have come.
Yeah. And one concept also, he was talking about this liquid content, and I was thinking about, let's say, a fact sheet. So normally journalists will write about some stuff, and I would say this will die out. You don't need it anymore. So fact sheet, you just ask some system, and it can spell out what is over there. But what you still need is a kind of what I consider kind of a type of a living fact sheet, which is a kind of a database, basically, where many sorts of things come in: scientific papers, expert comments, journalistic articles of high quality, all the stuff coming together, collected in the Science Media Center. Then everybody can have access to this kind of resource, which is curated, so it's human curated. There is still some guy looking over, but the agents are looking for new information, new papers, new stuff here in different countries. So you can think of kind of a developing, quality-controlled, accessible, basic database with all the stuff flowing in on certain topics on public matters. So let's say plastic, pollution, and then you can kind of collect, and then it's more systematically than just letting it go and flow all over the world. So, and you can even devise APIs and stuff where it goes into the new ecosphere, but is still curated in a way that it's accessible to people, and then it can be translated in all sorts of different. So, but I think, yeah, we have to do it more liquid like we did before. But how far we can go, I mean, we are trying. So I think it's tough problems, and the question then, of course, is how far can general artificial intelligence do it themselves, so without doing human intervention. I'm still on the human intervention side. That's where I can look at. And yeah, well, we try to be up to date, and I think journalism and also scientific publishing needs to think hard about it, how the way will go forward. Even in science, you have these AI science people. They have these scientific conferences about AI reviewing scientific papers and stuff. So
Volker, I was going to jump in there because you know, if we look at where the scientific community is now, they do not think that peer review can be done by AI, right? There are elements of a review process that could be supported by AI, particularly around quality control, you know, conflicts of interest, which is actually quite a muddy topic, and actually it could be really useful to employ AI there. But actually there isn't a substitute for the kind of depth of experience and knowledge that you get from the expert people that will peer review. And I think that's really important. And we might see some changes there, but I'm not seeing AI taking over peer review anytime. But what I think is a nice development in some of the journals is transparent peer review, where all of those reams of comments are now available for you to see. And that might be interesting to see how that supports AI going forward, right? But that interrogability, that still really relies on the experts that we see in this process.
So that's a very, very good jump on it. Expertise and popularity in that respect, especially if we're looking, for example, on the application of large language models, is always biased. So we always have, actually, we want to be as unbiased as possible. But research states that we cannot remove the bias overall. And secondly, if people are popular or even more popular in certain reviews or utilized more as experts, they become even more popular, making it much harder for others that may have also developed some sort of expertise to even jump in this type of field or in this type of review game. So how can we actually tackle this problem, especially in scientific publishing, that we see who's state of the art, and do we not already put a bias in there by selecting?
Ooh, this is an interesting question that I wasn't prepared for. I mean, AI is being utilized, right, to identify a wider pool of peer reviewers. We know that finding peer reviewers can be challenging. So AI can help us there, particularly as the diversity of science around the world changes and where it's being done changes. So we can find more peer reviewers using AI, but then you have to evaluate what their inputs are, right? So that's a really key part of it.
So we are actually having an AI system for some AI system, and we are coming into really degrading now, where does the information come from? Is it sustainable? Is it actually true? And how important actually is it? So David, you've been working with knowledge graphs in this respect. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, before I talk about knowledge graphs, maybe just to step back a little bit and sort of look at the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing here. So I know this is going to be a provocative thing to say at this conference, but I think that over time, this might take a decade or two to play out. I think the entire peer review publishing system decays. I think in many ways, the scientific method itself becomes challenged. And I know that's a very provocative thing to say here, but I honestly think this is true. I think the thing that we're looking for in this new world is a mechanism that either extends or replaces the scientific method for the AI world. And I think there's two characteristics that requires. I think it has to be truth-seeking, and it has to be self-correcting. There's a very comprehensive argument about this from a historical context in the latest Yuval Noah Harari book, Nexus. And he describes the process of the printing press and how the printing press created this vast abundance of information, and we had total societal chaos for about 150 years. We had the wars, the church fell apart, people burned at the stake as witches, there was all kinds of horrible things happening. And then only after about 150 years, we invented journalism, we invented the scientific method, we invented government intelligence, we invented the body of common law, we invented these mechanisms to help us use the information productively. And the two characteristics are, number one, it has to be truth-seeking, and number two, it has to be self-correcting. So knowledge graphs bring in, this is my own area of investigation in this. They bring in a third aspect, which I think is fundamental as well, which is they're deterministic. So they're not probabilistic or statistical, they're deterministic, they're causal. And I think that's a fundamental thing that has to be present both in journalism and in science, in other fields. And so then the question that we have, I think, is, well, how do we replace this system based on text artifacts, on scientific papers, on journalistic articles and so on? How do we replace that with something based on a different atom or a different unit? And to me, it's a knowledge graph. And it's not necessarily the kind of knowledge graph that some of us may be familiar with from things like Wikipedia and so on. There are new kinds of knowledge graphs, for example, that are based on time, that are based on events, which might be a repository for journalistic information over time. But I think this is a frontier that's going to take a very long time to kind of work through and develop research on and find alternatives.
Can you jump in really quickly on this? Because I mean, I don't think we
can't
can say
let that stand.
I don't think we can say that science publishing is going to be obsolete, but I do think it's going to evolve, right? So what we think of as the traditional kind of peer-reviewed manuscript, that being it, that's only ever going to be part of the picture. So you're talking about protocols, you're talking about the data. Publishers are going to be looking at the ways that they surface that information and the way that researchers use it. So it's going to change, it's going to evolve, but it's not going to disappear.
Well, I would say the key thing that all of that provides is trust. And I think the trust side of it is fundamental, and then the mechanism for getting to that trust is secondary. So.
I mean, maybe I step in. He is an optimist. I'm a realist, or maybe I'm outgrown already. Maybe, and he's basically, if I understand you correctly, is what you say is, in the end, you have a kind of a user. So that's us. You can type in stuff. And you get a personalized account of everything the world knows in this day and this event on this whatever. And you have a kind of a godlike AI type of system which is providing you with everything. And the news is just in between the ones I want to listen to it or watch a video or whatever, different formats. So basically, if I could understand you correctly, that's basically where it goes. So you type in stuff or you want to have a video or whatever. And that can be very local, it can be very personalized, it can be on different sorts of the earth, it can be different, all the expertise is available. That may be a vision, and Huey said already that when the printing press was developed, of course, we had a kind of a rough 300 or 400 years before we created institutions who did this truth seeking and truth validation, and also bringing the attention of the publics or people to certain issues and not other issues. And I'm still not ready to just break down all the walls of all the trust institutions we have and then go for the AI. And especially not if this AI is produced by somebody, where I have no trust. And, but still we have to be prepared. And I mean, don't want to be too pessimistic, but if you let this AI system, let's say, do the science or do the journalism, do collect all the information, do the knowledge graph, you can expect a lot of fake and false and unintended authorities gaining social acceptance and the whole ecosphere, of course, and we can imagine, you can see it already in a way, and we have to be a little careful, and I think it's very important that we not just get rid of the institutions before we find ways in the institutions, at least some institutions.
Yeah, no, I agree.
In science or in
but I don't
journalism.
think that's. I think we don't get to choose at some level.
I know.
This is happening. This wall is coming down basically, and either we participate in it.
Yeah.
The community of people who want truthful, kind of socially beneficial information.
Yeah.
Either we participate in that and propose an ideal or a future that we want and work towards that, or we stand on the sidelines and let Elon Musk and Sam Altman do it.
But we also have to put some guardrails in it. So I think I would not get rid of scientific peer review just saying, well, the AI can do it because it's so great. No, it's not yet. If it's so great, well, let's see. Same in journalism. Or you can collect your news or from an AI system which is collecting all the information, because in science and also in journalism, a lot of expertise still is in the human brain and with the people doing the profession. And
But as a
see the
practical matter-
development, and it's very rapid. But I think as a society, to keep trust and not just overwhelmed by information abundance.
But as a practical matter, imagine some graduate student or some postdoc, and they have this long list of things to do, and they have to peer review this paper, and it's due tomorrow. And they're sitting there, and it's like PDF, ChatGPT, what do you think? Okay, I'll change that, boom. Like, I can't imagine that that's not already happening at some considerable scale.
I mean,
This is interesting. Yes.
I'm going to jump in because I have to, and sorry, and you guys have talked enough. We do know, that there are reviewers out there who might put papers into LLMs. Don't do that. But that use AI to support their peer review. But the bottom line is that there's something about peer review that is more than that, and that is about your expertise, your knowledge, your kind of hate to use so lived experience, but it's the culmination of all of that, and that
The
cannot
responsibility.
be, and the responsibility that comes at the end of it. So that cannot be replaced. Also, we don't usually tell you that you have to hand in your peer review tomorrow. It's not like homework.
Just a quick add on that. I think there's two things that persist in the long term in terms of the authorship. One is curiosity. The second one is responsibility.
Besides curiosity and responsibility, there is also a lot of, I think, skills that people actually need to develop and to have. So looking at science publications or as a science publishing house, what about AI literacy with journalists? Is there enough out there? How do you actually check whether they are on the same, they have an AI driving license?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. What we can do is give them the research into AI and hope that they can interpret it. But I mean, it's a broader question about AI literacy in society, right? That we need to think about that from the earliest possible stage. And that's actually about collaboration. And also AI literacy for scientists, from baby scientists to big scientists. I'm not talking about school, I'm talking about a university. So that's really about understanding what training they currently have and where it needs expansion. And it's interesting, we did a survey of like 7 countries where we looked at research integrity training. And actually, I mean, AI literacy, this is all part of research integrity, really, right? 'Cause how you use your AI reflects how the integrity of your research. And AI didn't even really come up in their lists of needs and wants. It was about data. But if we did that survey next year, I suspect the results would be really differently, and suddenly we'd see AI ping in there. And of course, it's associated with things like data management and all of those other techniques as well.
So basically the skill set is still evolving, it's developing. David, from your perspective, what type of skill set does somebody need if he wants to go or she wants to go in that field?
Well, I think there's two big ones. So the first one is more a relationship with AI, and that's just engagement. And I think I cannot overstate this enough. Yes. If you're not doing big challenging problems using like GPT-5 agent mode, if you're not doing that kind of stuff every week, you're probably not aware of what exactly is going on and how powerful these things are. So engagement is like everybody, journalist, academic publisher, everybody has to be engaging with these tools. The second one that I would suggest, this is particular to journalists, is abstraction. I think abstraction is a skill, and Volker, you kind of referred to this a little earlier, is a skill that journalists don't naturally have, because what they tend to do is focus on an article or a story and then put it aside, publish it, go to the next one, put it aside, go to the next one, put it aside. What they're less used to doing is looking at the totality or the pattern or the system. And that's something software developers do kind of naturally, but journalists don't. And I think journalists, in fact, all of us maybe, need to be able to do that standing back and looking at systems and patterns, that abstraction, rather than deal with things instance by instance by instance.
So systems and patterns sounds quite mathematical, statistical. Is this something where journalists, or what you experience in your media center lab?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, it was a big learning curve. I mean, when I started in 2012, so the center was set up in 2015, I started with data journalism, because people in data journalism were already much more quantitative. And I think science journalists were late to the party, although they were closer to science, and I didn't understand it why it is. Because you need this kind of pattern recognition, you need statistical data, competence. It's not just checking a paper, but thinking more in the abstract about what you can do. For example, about newness. What is new? There is a knowledge body of science, so what is a new discovery? What is it? I mean, you have a paper, okay, it's claiming that it's new, but is it new? Can you use systems to check, well, is it really new? Was there a paper 20 years ago? It really published it in a strange journal nobody's reading anymore, and stuff. So I realized that we need these skills as journalists to keep on in the business, to put in people. There was in medical ethics, there was this talk about strangers at the bedside. So the physicians were treating the patients, and then the ethicists and all the other legal people came in because there were so many problems showing up. In journalism, it's the same. So you open your doors, put these people in, quantitative people who can do manage language models. And the good news, I think, I don't know what your opinion about is cost is coming down. It's easier to use them. There's lots of open source stuff. So if you have the right people who can work with these tools and engage, and check every day, have good concepts, in the end, it's just, do you have an abstract idea of where the field could go? So, for example, explanatory science journalism, as I said, this is gone, basically. Just to ask, what is the bird flu? Yeah, well, you type in and you get a good answer. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's not bad. It's better than many journalists write every day in a little regional newspaper. This is just gone. So what is remaining? What is in the abstract? What is your future benefit you can provide for the community and for example for the media organizations? And my feeling is that the legacy media organizations, they are trying it. They put in a lot of people. Maybe some of them will survive. I'm optimistic in this. Science the same, who is going to survive? Not everybody. There are guys saying, well, in 10 years, the university, maybe there are good ones working with AI agents in science. Other ones are still doing some other stuff, like the theological faculties in the Middle Ages. They were just talking, but the new science was somewhere else.
The question, though, I would have is what do the ones that survive, whether it's in science or in journalism, what do they do? Like, what is their function in 10 years?
Yeah.
And if they survive, they're going to adapt. How do they adapt? You know, that's the question I think that we're...
Yeah, so for the purpose, I would say, well, we still need an informed public.
Well,
so everybody
and the public wants to be informed.
And the public wants to be informed, and as long as we provide the tools to be informed, and as you can see with Twitter and Elon Musk, you get some questions whether he's really informing the public or some misleading, whatever. So we have to think hard about how we. I think this is the goal, and your question is how do we get there, and what are the tools we need, and how science and journalism about science needs to change to keep the informed public without interference from many other agents who also want to get into the AI. Because my concern with your automatic vision of a God AI providing information for anybody would be that, well, who's God? And who's putting in information? And can we...
Yeah. I tend to think of it as a network of agents rather than models, rather than a single godlike model, but
I think
that's a minor point.
It's very interesting talking about that one, the godlike model. I think your word, I think especially automation bias is something that immediately pops up in that respect. And utilizing this, especially for science communications, I think has a lot of challenges. But interestingly, I think it also shifts, it has so many different type of angles, it also shifts how universities produce science and what they actually account as scientific work anymore. Also that changes. Hence for you as publishers, Alice, how do you see this type of development? If, for example, earlier you have had some sort of meta articles that were summarizing more or less certain stages somewhere and elaborating on trends, or is it more in the way that you really need empirical data now at the moment where you say, this is maybe a little bit more I can see it's true. I can see it's honest. Is there any difference, or is this honesty something where you say it's important for me?
I mean, I think primary research is always going to be the key, right? So if you're talking about meta-analysis or review articles, that's a space where we're seeing some encroachment. But when you're talking about primary research, that's really important. Now, there are bad actors that are trying to manipulate and publish fake papers or publish fake data, usually because they effectively want to create CV points on scientists' records. And that's stuff that we have to really act on and we have to prevent, and that's a really important part of what we do. So that's an area of focus for us. But primary research, I think, is always going to kind of be the lifeblood, but it's going to be broken up into parts. It's not the research paper, it's all the bits. It's then layering on AI tools that we are developing ethically that would look at how you can better interrogate and do things with the data, or interrogate the methodology or other elements to that. So it's being able to disaggregate the parts as well.
So coming back to your godlike AI, what type of...
His words, not mine.
Yeah, it's
Oh, but you're saying many to one. I mean, that's your vision. I'm the one, and the many.
I think. So the way I like to think of this, just to clear up the godlike thing, is I think if you can look at a continuum, and on one end of the continuum is, say, pre-printing press ignorance. And on the other end is, I'll call it godlike omnipotence, where you just have this total knowledge. I think what we've done since the printing press is move along that continuum. Yes. And I think what AI and AGI and perhaps even superintelligence can do is move us a considerable additional distance along that continuum. That's, just to be clear, that's kind of what I'm talking about, not the ultimate end of it.
But if we imagine that would exist or is coming or is being developed even greater, again, what are the skills for the different type of stakeholders? What do they really need to know to make an informed decision?
Well, I think the thing that we're missing as societies is the mechanism, is what is the truth-seeking, self-correcting mechanism that we can trust, that we can all contribute to. My own take is that it's some kind of a knowledge graph where we have common facts that are shared and verified and archived and have provenance and all the rest of it, rather than these text articles that we've relied on for 400 or 500 years. But it might be something else. But I think the trust element is kind of fundamental. It's got to be something that people on very, very different sides of issues and questions and all that can at least point to and agree. And I think the skills are going to be around that. So I don't think we can't sit here and say, this role or that role is going to be important in 5 years or 10 years. But I think things that will remain are things like trust, things like curiosity, things like the ability to take responsibility, to evaluate, to identify value and output from AIs. I think those things are going to be around not just 10 years from now, but 10,000 years from now. But the form that they take, we need that mechanism before we can say that, I think.
And companies, especially, that might be approaching you and ask you, how can we actually overall capture the problems, but really apply a strategy where, for example, there's nothing there, or it's already research intense, or it's a research company? What would you actually recommend?
Yeah, well, we are kind of an intermediary, interesting position. So we are publicly funded, so we have foundations behind us. So we are not on the market. So, and I think these kind of epistemic intermediaries may be necessary. I think they are necessary because they can kind of act with innovation, but they can then reconnect to the journalistic system as it is, or new people developing in different formats, and then they can use what is developed in these little organizations like us. So, as I said, so I cannot. At least for now, I'm not talking about the next 10,000 years, but let's say 10 years, that we, without artificial general intelligence solved, I'm a skeptic, but maybe it will happen. And then the question is, if it would happen, then the question is there the human still in the game, or is it something else and it's going whatever? So that's just religion for me. But what do we want to achieve? And for me, it's still, we want to have an informed public. We want to have people having access to the best information possible. These are provided so far by science, journalism, legal system, some other institutions. And although we can evolve these institutions, and they need to hurry up to use all these systems which make sense, I would be a little bit wary. So our little organization is a little bit faster because in the journalism domain, I mean, David knows a lot about the problem of innovation inside these old media legacy organizations, structural problems. You can talk an hour about it. But in principle, maybe you need new, like little mammals inside all these dinosaurs, but still they have to have a function, they have to have a purpose, and they have to have integrity and responsibility to what they are doing. And we are kind of an organization helping journalists with these tools and trying to help them in wherever they are, whether they're on TikTok or in the public television or in a newspaper. And I think the knowledge graphs and other systems can help integrate knowledge the best way possible, using science as it is, and that is still the resource we are looking at because we are science journalists, would be for me the way forward, without just sitting down and waiting, well, when Sam Altman solves AGI.
I think something we're not talking about here is the value of human connection. And actually, if we look at the way that people consume information, yes, we're typing into Google, what do I need for X, Y, and Z, but we're also gaining information from the people around us and trusted voices. And if you look at what's happened in the media, you've seen the rise of kind of the journalist as the trusted source themselves, not necessarily the outlet that they report for. And like the FT did the report last year, where they looked at how 18-year-olds in India, I'm going to say Nigeria and the US were consuming news, and they're going to trusted voices, and that often is journalists. And also when they're consuming information, they might look at it on the face of it, but if they're actually genuinely interested, they're going down into it, and they're tunneling down through the information, and they're doing the research, right? This isn't just a question of simplistic kind of the consumption of news. And so there's always, I think, going to be space for those trusted voices just because of how people want to connect with information.
I think that's a super important point. In a way, like if you look at this from the institution's point of view, whether that's a journalistic institution or a scientific institution or university, there's competition coming from two sides. From one side, the machines are coming, but from the other sides, these kind of super empowered individuals with their YouTube channels, their Substacks, their long-form podcasts, whatever it happens to be, and there is real trust in those super empowered individuals. It's a question then of the role of the institution in a world where we have super empowered individuals who have a very significant claim on trust, mostly from their history in publishing or broadcasting, whatever, and also the machines who have already claimed a certain amount of trust with a significant sector of the public.
But scientists are some of the most trusted people, right? All the surveys that they do, scientists come up very high up the system. So technically, these should be our trusted voices. But we face the challenge, which actually is somewhat facilitated sometimes by of harassment and the challenges of actually being out there publicly. So one of the things that we have to do as that kind of science communications community is to support them better and deal with issues of harassment. And that's actually something that the science media centres have done very effectively.
I want to come back to that point about the digital public sphere as it developed, and my conceptualization of it is a little bit, you always have this periphery, some agents, some people walking around knowing stuff, do not know stuff, and then you have the center where there's some knowledge, wherever it is, and where the decisions are made. And in this digital public sphere, which we have already now, we develop new mechanisms from people who are very much in the periphery coming directly to the center by attention, resonance, allegiance, like Trump. I mean, he's basically in the presidential office saying, I'm in the periphery, I'm working for you guys outside, but he's the president, so it's a little bit strange. Or the new mayor from New York, 1 year ago, nobody knew who he was, little follower, now he's the mayor. So these kind of peripheral central shifts through the digital public sphere. And I imagine what will happen in an AI ecosystem if it's coming into this and propelling some agents from some strange place, wherever it is, to the center of attention. And what do we do then? Yeah. And I think this will come, and this will create either chaos, or we still have trusted sources which can kind of sort out or manage to reach out to the people who get to this kind of digital sphere. But it will be much more dynamic. In time, it will change a lot. New agents come up, agents go down, and that will be a new, very chaotic system. And you say human connection is the way, because we are humans, and as long as we can stay humans and not, we kind of have certain needs, and these needs need to be taken care of. I would still say, and not just looking what's the next step, and we can get rid of us. So I would not bet on that.
So the human connection is a very important one, and we have some control systems. A lot of people say EU is doing a lot of regulation, sometimes over-regulation in certain spaces. But when it comes to scientific publishing, there's also always a question of utilization, IP rights, and the input that basically is on larger models, whether it was taken or not taken, is it there, is it not there? So I think in science publishing, there is a lot going on, and maybe Alice, you can elaborate a little bit about the pros and cons of certain strategies?
I mean, well, first of all, I would say, we haven't licensed our content. Some publishers have. There are clearly some benefits to doing that in terms of informing the training of models. But ultimately, we have authors, we have responsibilities to them, and we need to know what's palatable to them, what they want. We've just done a survey recently, so I think it's 72% of the authors that we surveyed, journal authors we surveyed, saw value in making that material available. That certainly wouldn't have been the case 2 years ago, right? So things are changing, but our position on this has always been we've got to act responsibly. We've got to reflect what our authors want and need, because ultimately they're the ones that produce the research. But I do think we're going to see a shift with the community in terms of how acceptable it is to put their hard work effectively into these models, and that is changing. As for where various legal cases are, I'm not commenting on that whatsoever.
not actually asked you to comment legally on the things. But we talked outside a little bit. I mean, it starts actually when science publication houses sell information or not sell information. Is it coming up to a certain accessibility question that we tackled later on? So David, how accessible is premium information going to be?
Well, I think this is one of the risks, is that like at the moment we have this problem because our copyright regime is built for artifacts, for the 800-word articles. It's not built for the less tangible things like facts and styles and arguments and all this kind of stuff. So assuming we can get past that, the question then becomes, well, what is the what is the thing that you apply IP to? And it's essentially access to flows of information. And so then things like fixing the workarounds on scraping, for example, like being able to genuinely lock down flows of information and then charge for those, that's the obvious way to go. The problem with that, as you kind of bring up, is that that's great if you can afford accurate, high-quality, trusted flows of information into your chat experience or your video experience, whatever it is. It's not so good if you can't afford those accurate, trusted flows of information. And that's I think, one of the big worries here, is that we end up in a world where, it's kind of like the way the news media has developed in the last decade or so under the influence of distributed publishing, is that we have this paywall system, and you're either in the paywall system and it's high quality and you're empowered by that information, you're made more omnipotent, you have more choices in life because you have this very high value information, or you're outside the paywall and it's just noise and confusion and distraction and commercial messages and political people trying to get you to do this and that, and it's just a complete chaos. And so you have inside the paywall is super empowered, outside the paywall is disempowered. That's the risk.
But that's part of the value of open research and open access, right? So, and that's why that's the direction that publishing has gone. And last year we published more than 50% of our research was published open access, and that is about trying to deal with that disparity.
Yep.
And then on top of that, if you're looking at the scientific community, you also have initiatives that provide free access to paywalled material to those that aren't able to.
And it may be that this 72% number that you just mentioned, this sort of increasing willingness of your authors to have their information in these models, that may be this sort of increased understanding that, hang on a second, we kind of have to have this information available openly, which would be a great sign.
Volker, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. I have a little bit, the world David is describing, I think he's kind of right. You can have another divide of the people who have very good information through AI or whatever other means you can have, just paying for good stuff, and the rest of the population where you basically have all this pollution ecosystem like we did in the 19th century and still do for the environment. I mean, the information ecosystem can also be polluted for most of the people and still be very high quality for a few people. And this is a grave concern. But the legal issue, and I'm not a legal expert, I will not comment on the legal situation in different media, but the interesting thing is that there is kind of some evidence that the companies were using kind of copyrighted material which was behind a paywall and using it for the training. And there's now a huge debate whether it's allowed to do it and in what way, what is it? Is it really in the training data? Because the system can remember the stuff it picked up, a news article from 19 whatever, which was not in the public domain, but will for somehow reasons end up in the model. And this kind of stuff, and it will be very complicated things because, of course, we didn't talk about it, but it's scientific publication. Media ecosystem is also about economic viable business models, and it's not just in the theoretical realm. So a publisher who is providing a service needs to earn money for somebody, and same with news media, and who's willing to pay for it, and then who is distributing it for free. I mean, we as a non-profit organization, we can, the expert comments we solicit, we can give away for free. That's good. So they are in the public domain. They get into the AI, they get into news articles or television or what interviews and radio and stuff, which is good. But that's not yet a business model. It's just a way of...
In the absence of a paywall, what's the economic incentive to produce difficult and expensive information?
Right. That is the basic thing. And I would say if I would have a prediction, what will remain as a valid service, let's say for journalism, it's a realm I can talk about. It's deep investigation on the ground, getting information which you cannot get with just data collection. And it's in a way, it's exclusivity. You have something and you uncovered something and you bring it to the public. And so it's news, it's really news, like in science. It's a new discovery nobody ever made before. But we know both of these things are very expensive. Yep. So in journalism and in science. Also, really good breakthrough science is very expensive. Maybe cost will go down, but in principle. And therefore, that is a dilemma. How are you going to finance this system, even if they work for the public interest? So in the age where a machine can recombine this fluid way of information gathering, yeah, well, I think it's an open question. I don't
well, the machines help there as well. I mean, a question that I often ask my strategy consultants, my strategy clients in my consulting is, well, what would you do if you had 20,000 extra journalists? What would you tell them to do if you were you had them? You know, the government has a program. They hired 20,000 extra journalists for you. You can tell them what to do. What do you tell them to do? Or 20,000 extra writers and graphical illustrators and video producers and audio producers. 20,000. What do you want to do? And most of the senior leaderships in news organizations have no idea what they would do with 20,000 additional journalists. But that's, at some level, the question that they have to face. Right?
Interesting. So we are actually having the possibility to have questions to the panelists. Do you have a microphone?
So thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us. My name is Gail Patricia. I'm coming from Canada, and my research is about AI in emergency and ambulance. So my question is about in the research view, since I'm a researcher. So it was about how should the academic community redefine the publication ethics and the transparency, since right now we are using AI for writing, for helping for data analysis. How could we balance innovation and also ethical academic rigor, both of them?
Okay. Well, first of all, there is some clear guidance about transparency and disclosure, and I think that's really important. The STM Association, which is the kind of trade body for us publishers, has done some really nice work, which is looking at the kind of disclosure ontology you might need for the different sorts of AI you're using and how you're using it, certainly in manuscript production, but that will also expand back into research. So this guidance is being developed, but it is taking time. In terms of how you marry the responsibility with the innovation, I think it's also thinking about trusted providers. So not just us, but including us who are developing AI tools responsibly for researchers. So like Nature Research Assistant, which is a really nice one to look at if you're looking at how you read, find new research and write research. So I think it's looking at trusted providers to help to support you in how you're utilizing AI. But all the publishers publishers at the moment are working a lot more on guidance, and that guidance also is reflecting community norms as well. So it's not just us kind of working away at this. This is to do with us working with the research community to better develop those standards or articulate them, perhaps.
And I would just add that you can expect, for example, science journalism will delve into checking whether these systems are used in a responsible way from the public perspective. Well, is there something going on which we don't like, which we don't need, which is kind of risking? Yeah, well, there are systems already, Rejection Watch, or some other systems you can build and check whether publications are kind of taken from other pieces of bits and stuff. So I expect more investigative journalism in this area to kind of double check for integrity, which is, of course, inside science pretty important. And also in journalism, of course, there are a lot of ethics guidelines, and I don't want to cite them all, but the question is really, what are you doing in the practice? I mean, he's engage, and check and validate when you are using it, and is it good for what is your comparator? And yeah, you need to be very reflective and responsible in using
and
stuff.
Training for researchers is going to totally change as well, because it's going to have to reflect AI ethics in a completely different way. So the medical research profession has had ethics really embedded for a really long time in terms of like consent and things like that. And if you look at the computer science research area, that's much newer, and it doesn't have necessarily the same level of ethical standards embedded in it. Sometimes there are, but sometimes there aren't. And what we're really going to need is a shift in terms of how we're training those researchers who are quite often now moving into medical and biomedical areas of research, so that they are really applying the standards that are over here into the work that they're doing over there.
Absolutely.
Maybe I can redefine the next one, because how far can we go on the acknowledgement on using AI when it's terms of publication? Like, how many percentage should be my authorship when I'm using AI? Like, which, like, in your Spring Journal Nature, like, how many percentage I will say, okay, this paper, even if they use AI for writing of analysis, is for this author or for AI? Like, how?
So AI can't be an author, like, quite clearly. So authorship, responsibility for authorship always has to sit with your researchers. So if you're going to use it, you need to declare it clearly within the manuscript. It's not a get out of jail free card, right? You're still responsible for everything that's described in that manuscript. The only case where you wouldn't necessarily need to disclose it is if it's in very, very basic copy editing. That's really important. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you for all the information from the discussions. It was really. I'm Nestor from Spring Nature. I'm a colleague of Alice. And during these days, we've been talking a lot about the impact of science communication, the value it has. Most of the children, when I was a child, I wanted to be a scientist, a fireman, or a policeman. Now children want to be YouTubers or TikTokers. And as you were saying, they are very influential people in the spheres, and usually they are not science experts, right? Mm-hmm. So I need to quote a real headline. Please bear with me with this. Uranus opens and closes every day to let out hot winds, according to scientists. This is a real headline from real research published in Science and Space. Actually, it's a research about the magnetosphere, the behavior of the magnetosphere of Uranus. And the point is, if you have written that, the magnetosphere of Uranus opens and closes based on crystals that happen in the atmosphere, nobody would read it. But this went viral, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe some child will read that and will say, okay, this is cool because I can learn something about the space and it's funny, right? So how much responsibility do you think science communication has in appealing to next generations or to current generations in creating, it has to be more on the side of trust, because academic rigor that was mentioned before relates more to seriousness, but maybe the clickbait relates more to things that are appealing to the audiences, to the public. So how much should we balance that, and can AI help? That would be my question.
I mean, I can have a go at that. I mean, this is the easiest thing that AI can do, is to take the most arcane, specialist paper about the most boring subject you ever imagined, and turn it into a TikTok video suitable for 12-year-olds. I think this is one of the vast opportunities that these tools have, is they can take information in all kinds of different ways, definitely in science, and they can make it accessible and not just the headlines, but the medium that it's in, the degree of seriousness, the degree of, comedy, whatever it is. This helps. This helps us particularly because we have this assumption that the public is kind of all the same, and I think we've published journalism and science in a way that assumes the public is all the same. We assume they like to read. We assume they have a certain vocabulary. We assume they have a certain frame of mind that they're in when they're consuming serious information. And that's just not the case. That's a minority of people that are kind of like all of us here in this room, but it's not a majority of people. There are a vast array of different ways that people interact with information. And these tools can make this perfect fit between all information and all of these different styles of people, people's absorption of information. So I think this is one of the superpowers that AI gives us.
I'm going to say yes, but
Okay.
on the basis that, so we've done quite a lot of research looking at AI models and how they can represent our research papers. And at relatively superficial levels, yes, absolutely, you can make it fun. But to kind of really to dig into the paper and produce something more meaningful, we've found that it's quite difficult. And for where we've trialed different models looking at how they could represent, produce press releases for research papers we're working on. If we want it to be properly accurate and meaningful and provide the information we think is important, basically we would then check with the editors to check that it works. And they're like, yes, it's fine, but it's incredibly boring, right? And that's usually where
all that is bad prompting. That's all that is.
Well, it depends what you want. What you want it to do. If you want it to represent accurately and do the bunch of things that we do, then yes. If you want to produce a fun video script, which we've also done, trialed using AI, you can do that. It depends on the depth of information that you want to get out there, but that also relates to what the audience want to receive as well, right?
Yeah.
So maybe 2 comments from my side. Yes, I agree. In science communication, and many institutions are really enthusiastic. Now we can have a paper and put it out in 100 different formats, 250 languages and stuff. I think that doesn't solve really the problem, because it's still one paper and it's no integration of knowledge. It's just not in a knowledge graph or somewhere. It's just a paper. If it's the wrong paper, it will be everywhere in any format, but it's just wrong, fake news, whatever. So that's not a good idea. So 10 years ago, I said to institutional science communication, you have to be aware if you go out to TikTok or whatever, are you pretty sure that what you're putting out is really true? I mean, is it truth-seeking? Is it really valid? Or is it just reputational communication? And you can do a lot of damage if you do it wrong. Everybody knows that. And it happened before, and it will happen again. And therefore, I'm always on the integrity side. I wanted to make another point, and that is, I think in a scientific paper, for the domain-specific expert, there's a lot of tacit knowledge in it, which is not written down in the code or in the data or in everything. It's just in the brain of the reader of the stuff, and you cannot extract that with artificial intelligence. Not yet. Maybe in the future. But so this tacit knowledge aspect, and the same with journalism. If I see a paper, you develop intellectual expertise in looking at scientific papers in the fields you're kind of comfortable about, whether it's new or it's relevant or it's a new discovery or it's some methodology. AI can help you with that, but I still think there is a lot of tacit knowledge in these domains which so far cannot be extracted automatically.
If you read a lot of papers, you develop that tacit knowledge over time. If
that is a good question. Yeah,
if you don't read that, and then you don't have access to that tacit knowledge.
That is a major question. If you digest all papers in a certain domain, will you have all the tacit knowledge in the domain? I would say no.
And I'll just quickly give you a practical alternative, which is a workflow that I think a lot of academics are starting to use, which is to take all of these papers, all these PDFs that you come across during the week, and pile them into Google Notebook LM and have 50, 80, 100 papers a week, and then have a couple of hours of interaction with the corpus of stuff that you've collected in the week, identify things that you're interested in, and then drill down to those. And you lose the tacit knowledge of reading all of the papers, but you gain in the sort of the completeness of coverage of what's happened that week in publishing that you can keep up with. So.
Are there any more questions in the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you for the interesting discussion and also reflection points that you provided. I'm a researcher, and as such, I also provide peer reviewing and handling editing support to the science community. And I was wondering whether you have some suggestions or ideas what to watch out for when I do these sort of support services and this work in terms of AI, understanding whether there was AI used or not, apart from the questions that were discussed whether I should or not employ AI, which I have not done yet.
Okay, I think I should probably fill that to start with. I mean, hopefully your publisher should be supporting you with this already. So, for example, with us, we've developed a bunch of tech tools which help us to develop some of the more understand where we can identify some of the more problematic uses of AI. So we've got a tool which looks to see if basically a paper's been AI generated as a generated nonsense text, or a tool that will identify irrelevant references, which is also a hallmark of AI use, inappropriate AI use. Or there are also tools on the market with which we use, which will look at whether images have been manipulated with AI. So actually your publisher should be kind of doing hopefully a lot of the heavy lifting for you with this. Where we rely on editors and peer reviewers is going to be much more for their disciplinary expertise. But what I would say, I mean, tortured phrases are the really obvious ones that everyone recognizes, and we have a tool for that too. If you don't know about tortured phrases, it's basically how people or AI has tried to avoid plagiarism detection by changing one well-known phrase for another. So breast cancer becomes bosom peril, for example, right? So publishers are getting much better at identifying those, but those are the kinds of indicators that you'd probably be looking for. But hopefully, we've already dealt with that upstream.
Thank you. I have also one question from the audience online. Are gateways and liquid content incompatible?
The what?
Are gateways and liquid content incompatible?
I would say not necessarily. I mean, I know I keep dwelling on this knowledge graph thing, but you can imagine a situation where you have gatekeepers to a knowledge graph, and that's the fundamental grounding data for science or even for society. And then you have liquid content on top of that grounding data. And I think there's scenarios that are quite likely. I don't think they're structurally incompatible, but they don't work well together.
I've actually realized I just want to come back on that because AI is changing and the way people will utilize it in the development, the production of papers is changing. So tools will have to continue to develop, right? So I'm talking about what's currently we're looking at, but it's going to change. And I think what we will also see besides that is shifts to sort of actually verification further upstream. So working collaboratively with, for example, scientific instrument makers and institutions to put hashes into to scientific images that are coming so you can see where it's come from and whether it's been altered. So that's some of the kind of future level stuff. It's evolving. It's a bit of an arms race. So, we're working on it, and it's something that we'll be looking at, new future stages of as well. Sorry to go back.
We have another question in the back, please.
Thank you very much for this great discussion and also for sharing your expertise and your experience. My name is Christine Falk. I'm a life scientist coming from Hanover Medical School. You were talking a lot about the potentials, the high potentials of AI and a lot of trust and truth seeking. My question is, we have experienced that AI is used against scientists, and as much as we need quality control, we have to be able to defend ourselves in our quality control. And so there is AI and tools out there that question scientific publications, sometimes going back 20 plus years. And so my question to you is, what kind of expertise, what kind of competence do we need to develop to really identify the very tricky question on scientific reliability, scientific quality, and also using AI, but not let it turn against scientists so that everything can be questions if you just take an AI that tells you that figures have been duplicated or plagiarism, etc. And I think this is a threat that we should be able to fight and to really be able to work against it. And your experience with that would be quite interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, well, maybe I start with, as a science journalist, disinformation, misinformation, people misinformed, people not knowledgeable, believing that there is a flat earth or whatever, it was always that way. Many people believe very strange things. What is new now, I tried to say about this new digital public sphere that epistemic authority, which was kind of granted by gatekeeping institutions, is kind of gone now. I mean, not gone, it's not gone, but it's, let's say, we have now systems which can challenge it. And actually, we don't have a simple answer yet for how to manage this. Maybe you have one. I'm still looking for it. And, but you have to remember that in history, when I was starting as a journalist in 1992, I once heard statistics, how many people in Germany read, let's say, quality national newspapers? And it was 3 or 4%. So, but then you had these local newspapers and television. So it's not that everybody was informed in the former ages, and now nobody's informed anymore, and everybody's just receiving some AI stuff. But still, you are right. The potential to get to very dystopian public discourse is really there, and we see it already. But at least I don't see simple tools, fact-checking, whatever. It's just not there because humans are like humans, and specific types of contents, if they are algorithmically or with AI generation propelled into the center of the attention, then we have a problem as a democracy and as a public and an informed public anyhow. So, and the gatekeepers were kind of reaching a specific audience, but the systems were kind of stabilized for a long time when they were developed. And now they are again in a new age where we are kind of under pressure. But in my imagination, we need to find ways with AI to detect, monitor, attack, and whatever we can do to remain a liberal democracy without having these systems go wild. How we do it?
Well, I think the thing we cannot do is just protect the old system at any cost. I don't think that's going to help. It's not going to work. And I think we have a lot of uncertainty about kind of, what these next decade or two are going to be like. But I think what we can do is we can articulate or sort of collectively develop an idea of what we would like to happen in terms of an informed, truth-seeking society, and then have that as an ideal to work towards. And I think unless we have that, optimistic view of, well, in a good case, it won't be a dystopia, it'll be this nice thing that we want, then we can kind of work and build towards that. If we don't have that, if we only just look at the bad and critique and all that, then we don't have something to work towards and improve towards. And I think that's, at this stage, with all of this uncertainty, to me, that's the biggest thing that we need, is a positive vision that we can all work towards.
I'm going to go right back to something much more practical, which is that we do know that scientists come under attack, and when they do, they quite often attack the publication record because it's an easy kind of point of entry. And we also get, sometimes journalists and others, saying, why don't you just retract that paper? That just shouldn't be part of the literature. And I think we often get criticized for not moving fast enough in these cases. And actually, I really push back here that we can only address issues by looking at them properly, and we always investigate them properly. And knee-jerk responses are not the way forward. So that may mean sometimes that publishers look like they're slow, but it does mean we're looking at things properly, and it does mean where we do see malicious criticisms, which happen, that we're not actually, acting upon them. So I think that's really, really important. So what you will see now is there are more retractions out there. But they are thoughtful and they are careful. They're not immediate knee-jerk reactions. And I've seen a lot of that malicious reporting of ethics and integrity issues with journal content, which isn't appropriate, and we are being very careful with that.
So given the time, we have room for 2 more questions with short answers. One I have online, but one I saw already over here.
Thank you, Ulrike Feld, University of Vienna. I'm a social scientist, and I'm curious about how we think about these things when the language and the writing is part of the production of knowledge. And then you kind of feed the animal, if I want to say so, and it gets spit out, and I'm disowned of it. And I think this is an important question for young researchers in particular, because their writing kind of disappears in this kind of big soup and is not recognized anymore. But science builds on this recognizing other people's kind of input and novelty. And this might be different for different fields, but in the social sciences, this is a real problem, and probably also for the humanities, I know a bit less, but I mean, for all writing cultures, this is a real problem. How do you think, because all these detection tools and all these things just do not work that well. And I fear that if I go a generation down the stream, we just lose this capacity to be innovative about the way we write. And that is part of our culture as much as we develop technologies and innovations, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, is that, Volker, are you going to take that?
No, it basically comes down to, I mean, we had this discussion about, I said, can AI be a journalist or is it a tool? And I would say it cannot be a journalist. Maybe David would say, well, in the future maybe, I would, and still, even in science, I mean, the way we did science for the last since 18th century, was through authorship, basically. And you said also that AI cannot be an author yet for a scientific publication.
I don't envisage that changing anytime. This is responsibility,
therefore,
that's the point.
But the soup stuff is still there. So, and I agree a little bit. Same in journalism. If you produce a nice piece of journalism 6 months and then suddenly it's out, basically it's everywhere. And it can be decontextualized. It will be put in a knowledge graph and stuff. And so you may not be the author of the thing which developed from that. And for young scientists and also young journalists, this can create a problem in the profession. I agree, and I see that problem, but I don't have a simple solution.
Well, I think that that style of communication, writing, we have alternatives to that. So some research, not much, but some research, the main publication is a data set. Some kind of analysis type research, or sort of kind of a lot of social sciences in this, people might publish in unorthodox ways. They might publish on social media, on YouTube, on TikTok, and whatnot. It's not sort of recognized, in sort of the legacy authority systems, but audiences find that authoritative. But I think we're missing a bigger thing. We're at risk of missing a bigger thing, which is I think writing in particular has this linear, systematic, what Daniel Kahneman called a system 2 kind of thinking process. And I think that's a very large risk, is that if we lose that collectively, and this isn't just AI, this is also kind of social media, if we lose that collectively, we might lose a big chunk of our ability to think collectively. And that is something that I think we want to be very, very careful around. There's actually a great book about this that the media theorist Neil Postman wrote about in the 80s, I think it was. And he identified the risk then. I think it's a larger risk than ever.
So thank you very much, the audience here. The last question is coming from the audience online, and I think it's a really great wrap-up question. So quick and short. If AI is increasingly involved in generating and interpreting research, how do we preserve the human element in science? Things like intuition, doubt, and moral judgment. So how do we do it with our own intuition?
I'll take a stab at that. This is the exact question that people were asking at the dawn of the Enlightenment, when the whole theocratic religious way of knowledge was fading, and we had this new enlightened, rational way of knowledge that was coming. And it's exactly the same question. So I'm not going to give an answer, but there we go.
So,
Alice, maybe?
I know Volker wants to go next.
No, I'm still thinking of if AI can be integrated in our societies in a way that we get maybe in what you call AI enlightenment. I'm fine with that. But I think maybe I'm already a dinosaur and no longer part of the new next wave. I think we should not overestimate the value of humans in what they are, and not just look for what's the next thing beyond humans, but we still should look what humans are and how we collectively found institutions and stuff and gatekeeping and everything to keep on this earth and not just blew it away. So AI enlightenment would be the good story. the dystopian view would be that we lose control, lose gatekeeping, we lose everything, and then some whatever strange signs or whatever come up, and then we will lose out.
So what is your wish, Alice?
I think it's a bit what you were talking about. We couldn't envisage what it looked like when it started, but you know it's a journey that we're all on. And actually, really what I would take away from this, apart from anything else, is this has to be a collaborative journey, right? This isn't just about how publishers work or journalists work or researchers work or institutions. It's actually going to be something that we're all going on together and we will develop together.
That's very nice, together. So I thank you all a lot for participating in this really great panel, also for the audience, and again to the Volkswagen Foundation for hosting this panel. Thank you very much. It has been really interesting, and looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Danke.